Well, welcome back from our break, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you returning for what I am sure will be a great conversation. As was mentioned, my name is Spencer Chase. I'm lucky enough to be the managing editor of our D.C. office for AgriPulse Communications in Washington, D.C., making actually my maiden trip to Sacramento, so I appreciate you all keeping the weather below 115 for me. That's a very kind courtesy that you're all paying to me. I do also appreciate the lack of humidity as someone that has to deal with D.C. summers on a pretty regular basis. But enough about me and my weather concerns. Really excited for this panel and really excited for the discussion that we're going to have about the fruits and vegetables and growing innovation in that particular segment of agriculture. For those of you that don't know me, I'm born and raised in South Dakota on a traditional corn and soybean and beef cattle farm. In my neck of the woods, they refer to fruits and vegetables as specialty crops. I suppose here they're just referred to as crops. But looking forward to seeing what we can learn from this group and what we can all learn from each other. I would encourage you to be thinking of questions to ask by way of Slido. I'll be sure to pull out my phone here in just a little bit and be seeing what you all are looking to hear from this panel. And also want to thank our friends at the Almond Board of California for sponsoring this panel, as well as another water segment soon to be held after this one. And so appreciate their support and their sponsorship of this event. I want to go ahead and introduce our panel here that we have with us. On the my far left, your far right, is Stephanie Padroni with the Bayer Crop Sciences, where she is the Technologies Coordinator and Global Vegetable R&D Head. Next to Stephanie, we have Val Fleischman, the CEO of OptiHarvest. Next to, oh, we don't. Good. God bless America with common good. Well, hate it when that happens. But next to Val, we have Daniel Zechariah, the new Technologies Coordinator and with UC Davis. And next to Val, we have Jonathan Dessler, the CEO of OptiHarvest. There's the OptiHarvest that I was looking for. So appreciate all of you making a little bit of time for this discussion. And Stephanie, I want to go to you first because the subject of research and development is such a familiar one for those that follow farm policy. But a lot of the prioritization on research and development seems to be sort of those broad row crops, the corn and soybeans and wheat, to looking to grow research, grow innovation, and grow yield in those particular commodities. In your minds, do you think there's enough prioritization placed on the fruit and vegetable side of the R&D equation?
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, great. It's an important question, and you know, I think that at least at Bayer Crop Science, there is a large focus on our row crops. They're a large part of our organization and one of our value drivers, quite honestly. However, I sit in the vegetable organization, and I focus on R&D and vegetables. And what we do at Bayer is so collaborative that I don't think the focus we have in our row crops and the research that we do there is a detriment. It's really a benefit. We're really able to test and learn from each other. Trials that we conduct in cotton, we're able to glean learnings and apply those to processing tomato and vice versa.
Daniel, I'd be interested in your perspective on this from a sort of an academic viewpoint. Your thoughts on sort of the delta that we see between research on our more conventional agricultural products that might be more familiar in the Midwest versus some of the crops that are grown in this neck of the woods?
Well, my experience in terms of research effort and funding is mostly, at least in California, it's prioritizing fruit, vegetable, and tree crops, because there is where probably there's more room for finding the sweet spot. At the same time, I think it's very important to continue the effort on field crops, because things are going to change after the implementation of Sigma. Probably we have to change and shift the paradigm. Field crops are more opportunistic than tree crops and allow you to plant and produce depending on the water supply available. So I think the balance is a little bit skewed towards fruit and nut crops now, but I think it's somehow changing in the direction of the more opportunistic crops and field and basically agronomic crops. It's going to change in the next few years. Yes.
Well, and you bring water into the conversation. I want to bring water into our conversation as well here because, Val, as we look at California agricultural issues, you can't speak for too long without bringing up water and how that is such a key priority. What can you tell us about the work that Common Good is doing in this space, especially when it comes to making fruit and vegetable production a more sustainable enterprise?
Yeah, well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. And we have not yet worked on fruit and vegetables, but, and I imagine a lot of people probably haven't even heard of Common Good Water, so maybe I should just give a quick info on it, what it is. So we have been proving for about the past decade that you can install subsurface drip irrigation technology combined with best agronomic practices on alfalfa. And we went after alfalfa because it is such a high water use crop and because there is a more productive way to farm it if you combine that technology with the best agronomic practices. And so what Common Good Water is doing is basically valuing, verifying the water savings, and then all of the associated benefits that come with converting that crop to a more efficient method, which includes carbon sequestration, soil health benefits, all kinds of different benefits, economic, social, and environmental. So that's what Common Good Water is doing, and all of our field trials on 2,200 acres and 9 different locations have basically shown that the applied water can be cut in half from the average state, I think state average 5 acre-feet per flood irrigated acre. We have seen our average go down to about 2.5 of applied water on alfalfa. So trying to give another option to, it seems like right now there is a big challenge with farmers facing having to take their land out of production. And we heard this morning that dairy is the number one revenue in the state. So alfalfa is a really important crop, and there's a better way to do it. Long story short, Netafim is the provider, or Netafim, of the subsurface drip irrigation technology. Many of you probably know who they are and are familiar with them, so obviously this is a global company, one of the largest irrigation global companies in the world, and they do precision agriculture on all kinds of crops. So basically what Common Good Water is doing is valuing and verifying all of those benefits that are associated with that conversion, and then selling that to companies and governments that are looking to claim those benefits, either for water reduction or carbon sequestration purposes. So it can apply to multiple different crops in multiple different locations. We just chose to go after the highest water use crop in one of the most water stressed areas to prove that this can be a solution beyond just flood or fallow.
Mm-hmm. Can I? You say that it can be applied on different crops in different necks of the woods. I mean, can I press you for expansion plans? When we might see your company work in that direction, work on expansion.
Sure. I mean, so really the demand from Common Good Water's side will be driven by the companies that essentially want to improve reductions in their supply chain, right? So we can work on different crops depending on what's important to that company. So what we're in the process of doing now is looking at companies that don't have vertical integration with their supply chains, where they need somebody that can help support those farms, those farmers to make this conversion and support the best agronomic practices to follow. So I think it'll be driven by who the companies are and what crops they don't have control over that they might need assistance on. So I don't have an answer for you today.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Jonathan, let's bring you into the fold here, because I know this is, water efficiency and growth efficiency is something that has been a big priority of yours. What can you tell me about what your company has learned in this process and what you feel you bring to the table here?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Can tell. So my background wasn't in agriculture. I'm approaching this from the perspective of technology and innovation. But over the last 6 years, in building OptiHarvest, we're focused on optimizing light interception. So optimizing sunlight, maximizing the sun's rays and the most productive rays. And we're taking science that's pretty well established used in indoor cultivation on the spectral composition of light, and we're applying it to specialty crops. So we work with table grapes, wine grapes, citrus, pistachio, almond, and the idea is to get light into the more shaded areas of the canopy or the trellis system and deliver an optimized quality light, the spectral composition of light. So we've been testing and developing our products with some of the major growers in the Central Valley and Sonoma, Napa, Central Coast. So far, just primarily in California, and 6 years, we've done 60 trials, and we've gotten some really remarkable results. So we're improving yield, we're accelerating the growth of newly planted crops, so getting into production sooner, which is a big deal. Reducing certain labor costs. These devices that fit and integrate into farming operations naturally train crops, like on a trellis system, so you reduce the need of certain types of labor. But at a high level, what I like to think that we're doing is we're just sunlight is an important input, along with all the other inputs, right? So by optimizing that input, we're just helping create stronger, healthier plants. I say like we're creating stronger athletes. And the benefits that come with that, just like with humans, right? You're getting better ability to tolerate environmental stresses, right? And heat and frost and the like. So healthier, stronger plants portend good things. Now, along the way, over the last, I'd say really 2 years, what we're seeing is what we've measured above ground, now we're measuring below ground, which is really exciting as it relates to enhanced root system development. So stronger root system, and it correlates to other measurements we're taking with dendrometers and the like. We're now claiming, or we believe we're seeing strong data for higher water use efficiency, which kind of makes sense. Bigger root system, better ability to take up water, and so that's irrigation and fertigation, right? And along with the root system improvement, clearly biologically, you're seeing, extrapolate carbohydrate storage, carbon capture, and the like. So I think we're very excited. We're going, we're commercializing our products right now, so this is where we are as a company. But I think the tailwinds of what are happening here, in general around the world, and particularly in the U.S. and in California with drought, we're excited to, we believe, offer some part of a solution, right, that can help as an integrated approach, right, along with other genetics and chemicals and soil enhancement, irrigation, advanced irrigation systems. I think that's the idea is, again, this is biology for any living organism. So to create a stronger, healthier organism, a vine or a tree, I think that's, the pathway forward. And so that's how we're approaching it.
Mm-hmm. And Daniel, one of the things that seems to come to mind is when we're talking about the ability to use water properly and get the most out of it, is that sort of that, I often wonder, is efficiency and sustainability the same thing in this conversation? I mean, how is the best use of water the most efficient, the most sustainable? How do you see sort of the delta between efficiency and sustainability when it comes to California water use?
Well, now I'm going to get in trouble here. Anyway, I think the two concepts of sustainable water use and efficient water use are somehow decoupled, especially in California. We have system and management practices that are now up to 96% efficient on micro-irrigation, subsurface irrigation, and still we overdrafting aquifer and we, over-allocating rivers. And so the two things are separate. So an engineering efficiency has a boundary of, the root system. And when we have to evaluate our sustainable water use, we have to go way beyond those boundaries. And so normally, as been documented all over the world, that this high-tech irrigation practices and high-tech irrigation system have a rebound effect because you increase the amount of water that goes to beneficial use, you increase basically the evapotranspiration per acre, and you increase also the irrigated area. So this is not water saving or water conservation. It's more towards moving the productivity of water towards better yield, but at larger scale, this is not leading to any water saving. And so unless we create the framework for having a better water accounting and somehow put in place a way to maximize the amount of water allocation and the net benefit of that water allocation per acre, we're not going to reach, the target for the community of reducing. So there's always a confusion. I've seen this in several parts of the world where I happen to work. There's always the confusion between applied water and consumed water. So out of the applied water, if we shift the amount of beneficial water use, so evapotranspiration, towards more yield, that not necessarily means water saving. And so sustainability is related to allocating, water that is some amount of water that are sustainable for our water system or groundwater. And this is somehow always overlooked or looked, in a way. So basically what I'm trying to say is we divert, with high-tech irrigation, the same amount of water, probably more, and we consume probably a higher amount of water. The productivity of water is different. It's a different metric with respect to sustainable water use.
Well, and Val, when we're talking about that sustainable water use versus efficient water use and making sure that we're getting the most bang for our drop here, as I believe Secretary Crowfoot put it, I may be getting the verbalization mixed up a little bit there, but how do you think the difference, you talked about some of those difference in different commodities, different irrigation systems that might be used. How do you think the difference in which commodity is being irrigated and the land and water forms that are available to it will come into play here? Because obviously there's so much that goes, no two fields are created alike, no two commodities are created alike. How do we come up with solutions that are somewhat replicable given all of the differences that are in play here?
Well, I will not pretend to be an agricultural expert like my friend here, John. I did not come from an ag background, so I'm not going to speak broadly to that. But what I will say is that, I mentioned that Netafim is our provider, and they also have a dealer network that they work with. And so whenever we go in and work with a farm, there is a consultation that happens exactly with that farm about what is needed. It's not just a one-size-fits-all, right, on whatever crop that is. And so what are the goals? What are we trying to achieve? If we're thinking about groundwater sustainability agencies here in this state trying to comply with SGMA, it's really important to have those governance practices in place to avoid the over-allocation or the over-consumption, right? If you are going to be more efficient, right now, because there are reduced allocations, the choice, unfortunately, has been, I cannot farm with this amount of water, so what can I do? And there are alternatives to that. So I think, to answer your question, I don't know that I can from, I think, where you're coming from and wanting that answer, but what I will say is that we don't just deploy the same approach to every field, right? And this is part of the reason that Common Good Water kind of started what we did, is we're combining that consultation with the farm with staying with that farm, in the case of alfalfa, for 7 years, which is the life of the crop under these precision practices. And the reason we stay with the farm is to make sure that those water savings are achieved, that they're getting the yield that they want, that they're applying the right amount of water, that they've got a very robust pest management system in place, and all of those things. So I think if we were then applying it to other crops, it would be the same. What is your planned rotation? How do we make sure that what we're applying is going to work best for your field, not just from a sustainability perspective, but from an economic perspective as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, and Stephanie, I want to bring you into the fold here, because we talk so much about the irrigation needs of some of these different commodities, some of the water use issues at play here. Wonder what you think when we're talking about the sustainability picture. What do you think R&D and seed development has the role that those discussions have to play here?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, to be honest. And Val, I really like what you touched on with talking about precision solutions. So tailored precision solutions that are the right fit for the right crop in the right geography. And, we focus a lot of our internal research and development resourcing towards the development of these different technologies, sequencing technologies, data imaging technologies, the compute technologies that go along with processing these large amounts of data that we're generating. And it's a really, really powerful tool, all of this data. It really allows us to pinpoint the cause behind different stress responses, let's say, in a plant. And that really allows us to deliver the genetics that are necessary to help that plant sustain. And then it also give a prescription for the additional agronomic treatment of that plant.
Do you have an example that you might be able to cite in terms of an area where Bayer's R&D has been successful in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sequencing technology has been a really critical success for us. The cost of sequencing has continued to plummet, and it allows us to take a really in-depth look at the genetics of all of our germplasm. It used to be a very limiting factor where you were only able to target and identify certain key varieties that you were maybe able to investigate on a deeper level. Well, now we can sequence just about all of our germplasm. We have a much better understanding of the genetic variety that exists, and then that in turn allows us to tie that back to phenotypes of interest.
Okay. So, Jonathan, I mean, bringing you back in here, when we talk so much about the various innovations that are at play here, what do you think is possible? You said you're kind of looking at this from perhaps an outside perspective. Where do you envision the possibilities? What are the things that excite you when we talk about the innovations available to food and agriculture, and specifically this fruit and vegetable side of food and agriculture?
Yeah, well, I said I started as an outside. Now I feel like I'm very much inside it after 6 years, and I've really enjoyed it, the journey and the relationships building with some of these growers here in California, some major growers. So I guess we don't know what we don't know. That's why it's called innovation, right? And so we're focused on our part here, and it takes a lot of work to bring something from the lab to a commercial product, right? And that's my background, and I have a passion for it and a passion for the science. So I'm finding this, very gratifying and challenging, right? That's otherwise everyone would do that. So in terms of what we're doing, like I said, I mean, we're approaching this from I think a novel perspective as it relates to light as being a limiting factor in agriculture. And so that's our focus. And I mentioned, I think it's very much complementary to other approaches, that I mentioned before. But one I didn't mention, we're also involved in a precision farming platform that we're building. So as it relates to what Stephanie, I'm sorry, was just saying in terms of measuring data in that feedback loop. So we have a platform, we're measuring various environmental and physiological parameters, right, using IoT. And so it's a data stream, and we have partners. And I think that area of what you call it smart farming or precision ag, being able to integrate multiple data streams into an environment where then you can start to apply AI is the future, right? I mean, that is the future, and to the degree that can happen and train and learn each year, each season, that algorithm to train towards, higher production, whatever the goal is, I mean, that's going to be more and more, I think, what we're going to see happening. Having said that, so the technology for all of that exists, and to my understanding, you've got the major players out there with Google and very sophisticated technology to apply the AI. The correlations that are going to need to be made have never been done before. I mean, that's from a horticultural science point of view, right? We don't know how, this is brand new territory. What you can measure, it's like I say to people who are asking me or my investors, think of it like on a person. If you're measuring on a plant, you can have an EKG machine, an MRI, a blood panel, and you have this stream of data, right? But what to do with that is going to be really, I think, very exciting in the future. And I'll say from my conversations with partners of ours that are far advanced, they lament that they provide growers with this, data, but then how do you make it actionable? And I guess meaning that, you can show a grower that there's a lot of efficiency to be gained in irrigation, for example, but that requires investment into the plumbing, right, so to speak. If you're going to be precision agriculture and where you're going to have very precise, irrigation regimes, given the variability of soil, and you know about this more than most of us here, different terrains, that's a big investment in being able to have those sensors and that precision irrigation, and that's where all these things, I think, come into play. So that's exciting. I mean, we know AI and data, for better, often for worse, maybe we could say, is become such a dominant part of our lives. But in agriculture, I think that's a big opportunity and very exciting to see how that plays out.
Very good. Well, I mean, when you talk about the precision irrigation standpoint, we did have a question get submitted, and Daniel, and I'm going to direct it to you because I think you're best equipped to handle this one. But adoption of micro irrigation has resulted in less recharge. How can we both increase water efficiency and aquifer recharge, storage, and long-term sustainability? Your thoughts on that question?
Okay, at the state level, when I sit on tables and round table with, for example, the California Department of Food and Agriculture, I'm not suggesting to replace completely the surface irrigation system, because surface irrigation system can be there still and coexist with micro irrigation and help in other tasks like refilling the soil profile, leaching salt. At the end of the season, after a season of micro irrigation, you have a concentration of salt and nutrients that are anyway have to be flushed out and leached, because otherwise the salt will increase and will build up. So coexistence of two type of irrigation system is one way to go. Improving surface irrigation is another way to go, because we documented that, and the entire world and scientific community has documented that the level of efficiency, there's a lot of room for efficient water use in surface irrigation methods, and so we don't exclude those methods. And again, Sigma will probably shift the paradigm, towards more efficient use of surface water. And so I think the two things have to coexist. So we never suggest to replace completely the surface irrigation method with micro irrigation. Micro irrigation is always overlooked because we consider the water use only during the season, but growers have to leach and apply extra water during the winter, and that extra water is never accounted for when you consider water saving or better water productivity. So there is a way of managing one and the other, and also considering that less efficient, from the engineering point of view, less efficient irrigation methods are ecologically important because there's a return flow and groundwater recharge. So again, what we consider engineering less efficient is not important. I mean, it's important. Those inefficiencies are important at the large scale level. So coexistence or better effort to improve the surface irrigation methods.
Spencer, can I?
Yes, absolutely.
I can't help myself on this one.
Yeah.
So prior to working at Common Good Water, I was with an environmental nonprofit, and we supported some of the work of sustainable conservation here in the state, where they were proving this was years ago, the ability and the importance of recharging aquifers on farm, right? And I think most of that was done on almond farms, but I haven't tracked the work diligently since then. We do always leave our flood systems intact anytime we do this conversion, because we have to prepare to drip in dry times and flood in wet times. And it's going to be so important, as I think Secretary Crowfoot mentioned this morning, we're looking at infrastructure and storage and recharge and all of those things. So the farms actually are a really, really important component of that recharge.
Got a question submitted that I'm going to direct to Stephanie. Someone is wondering, will gene editing technologies help us to get to more drought-resistant varieties quicker than conventional breeding? Your thoughts on that subject matter, Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm really excited that somebody asked this question. Jonathan, as you were talking about, the future and what you're excited for, and talking about how we're generating all this data, and we're at this kind of precipice of all of these new learnings and really understanding the biology, right, underlying the traits that we see that we want. I'm thinking, I hope somebody asks me what I'm most excited about for the future, because it's gene editing. So gene editing is a way where once we have all this data and this information, and we have identified the biosynthetic pathways that are involved and the genes that underlie those particular pathways. It really gives us a ton of information about where we should be looking in the genome to discover varieties that are more drought tolerant, for instance. And so while we have the ability to look and assay, our plants, when we find plants that do happen to be more drought resistant and we see some genetic variation that seems to be associated with that, we still have the fundamental problem of taking that trait, that piece of the DNA that we know confers this trait we're really interested in, and transferring that into a commercial variety, for instance, that meets all the other agronomic needs and has, the right harvestability. It has the good flavor that consumers need. When you do that with traditional breeding, you cross the two plants and you get an admixture of the DNA. And so suddenly that commercial line, you end up losing a lot of those key traits that it needs to have. And so you have to go through many, many cycles of crossing and selection to get back to a place where you have that commercially viable product, but then also has this new disease resistance or drought tolerance or whatever the trait may be. And with gene editing, it's a complete game changer because it allows us to understand, see some variation, understand what its action is, and then take editing technology and apply it to the commercial variety of interest. And in that way, we can affect one precise change where nothing else in the genome of that plant is affected, and so none of its other traits are going to be affected as well. And so this is years and years of crossing and trialing and selection that can be saved. And that's just one application of gene editing. There are many more that I'd love to talk about.
Well, and while we're talking about gene editing, and we'll have a deeper discussion on regulatory issues later today, but while I've got you and while you got a microphone in your hand, I mean, if you had the ear of the powers that be that are setting state and national gene editing regulations, what's the one thing that you would most like them to know?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would like to enforce the message that regulatory agencies be open to sound science, be open to the idea of good science. Currently, some of our regulations are redundant or over-restrictive about certain new technologies. Gene editing is one where a lot of agencies are still in conversations, but the harm there, or the concern there, is that in doing so and having artificially high standards for producing data and being regulated in certain ways, it prices you out of being able to offer that technology to our grower customers. So it takes that really critical tool for them to grow more with less away from them. And so my encouragement is to not make a knee-jerk reaction about the science, really take the time to have discussion with scientists and be open to hearing and thinking through what is necessary to ensure safety.
Question submitted specifically for Daniel, wondering what you think about virtual twin technologies to better manage water irrigation and to increase water saving, looking at ITK mechanistical modeling, excuse me.
Yeah, but personally, I got involved in one of this, what is it called, virtual twin project. I really didn't understand what it was meant. But, and although I was a modeler before moving to California, I always think that there's a possibility to develop data-driven model instead of conceptual model and force it to, align with the data that we collected on the field. So I had to, drop my hat of a modeler when in 2013, I moved to California, and I realized that the reality is often not well represented by models. But there's a lot of room for predicting, anticipating, and have a kind of models that are well grounded or ground rooted and validated. And I think there's a lot of room there in anticipating how things are going to be if we increase if we intensify the cropping system, or if we do alternative scenarios. So I think it's a very interesting tools for anticipating and be prepared. So what I always put the emphasis on is kind of preparedness, especially with growers and state agencies. And I think virtual twins have that ability, as long as those models and applications are well validated and calibrated with actual data.
Stephanie, you're popular when it comes to the questions that are being submitted, so I'll ask one that's specifically aimed at you. And folks, somebody makes the argument, if we are actively increasing the health of soil and making greater water absorption possible, why then the need to augment the natural intelligence of plants?
Because of the extreme challenges that we're facing, specifically, in California, as we're talking about today, with water, labor, transportation, many other issues that make this a really, I think, unprecedentedly difficult and challenging time for the field of agriculture, and maybe even specifically for California. We need to use all the tools at our disposal if we're going to be successful. And so absolutely, thinking about soil health and how we can promote healthier root systems for better water usage efficiency is really important pieces of the puzzle. But additionally, anything we can do in terms of bolstering the genetics of that seed, of that plant, to where it doesn't have to be as affected by pest infestation, for example. It all builds towards that healthier plant that can yield more fruit, vegetable, nuts with the same or hopefully less resources.
Can I also comment on that? Well, I think climate extremes are also have to be part of the equation, because so far we've seen the response of the crop to a normal year, but during a normal year we have 3 or 4 or 5 heat waves, and those are the most damaging events. At the same time we got frost, and at the same time we got a lot of more pest pressure or high humidity period or fire and smoke. So I think engineering the plants will help, driving a little bit the response to this climatic extreme that we're seeing, and a lot of, fluctuation between one year and the other.
Very good, because there was another question there as well, wondering about the how abiotic stress indicators are being incorporated into plant breeding. What can you tell us, Stephanie, about what Bayer is doing at that point, and what the industry is doing at this point to kind of address those climate extremes?
Yeah, so, I think there's a couple of different facets, at least as I think about it in Bayer. One thing is the growing technology with sensor systems. So sensors have become so much more sophisticated and so much more widespread and able to deliver, findings from so much more acreage. So that allows us to really be measuring those abiotic stressors better than we ever have before. So I think that's super critical, not necessarily independent or specific to Bayer, but just in general. At Bayer specifically, abiotic stress is something that we think about quite a bit, especially, if we think about processing tomato in California. So as the environments are shifting and as our resources are dwindling, part of what we're thinking about is the need to maybe shift the growing environments for those crops in the future, right? And so thinking about the different geographies that we might be in the future growing, let's say processing tomato in, that's something that we have at the forefront of our mind, and we're working now to make those predictions so that we can produce the correct seed that can grow in those changing environments.
John, a question submitted for you, wondering if the R&D that you've undertaken in your company, wondering if any of that work has led you to think about any other innovations that could potentially could or should be funded.
Yeah, it's kind of a segue to, in a funny way, to what we were just talking about, because I think it has to do with adapting to the need, right? And as it relates here again, the complementary approach, you're dealing with the genetics, excuse me, and how to, and the topic of this conference, right? How to, resiliency and adapting to the changing environment and to climate changes. So for us, as I mentioned, so we're a private, for-profit company. So I got to keep my eye on. We have the R&D, and we got to move that to commercialization. So we've been very focused on doing that, and that's where we are today. It's an exciting inflection point in the crops that we've been working with, in specialty crops. So a few specialty crops, right? But high value. So I mentioned citrus, pistachio, almond. We've done some cherry. We've done some stone fruit. So in terms of the, I guess I'd call it more expansion, right? So now we're moving into blueberries, avocado along the Central Coast. We have called Opti Shields, which wind breaking. So a lot of what we're doing, again, is the physical device. I mean, the filtering of the light, we call that platform OptiFilter, right, in filtering light spectrum. But then we design the products in a lot of collaboration with the growers to create, I guess you'd say, a little microclimate, right? And in a sense, we say in our marketing, bringing the greenhouse outdoor to a degree. We're able to windbreaking, create a little plant growth chamber, so for retaining warmth, humidity, and on another product are Opti panels, which fit into trellis systems. That's, we've noticed very good data for overcoming heat stress from some of the big heat events we've had over the last year or two. So relative to controls, better able to handle sunburns and things like that. So when we think about expanding, I think it's really about going into different crops step by step, and thinking along the way ways in different regions, I should say also, right? Again, focus primarily in California, in the north, dealing with a bit of cool climate in Napa and Sonoma, but we're going to be looking to do things more in the northwest, on the East Coast, in areas where I'm sure there'll be more feedback in terms of different climates and how we can modify our devices to help in that regard as well. Yeah.
And Val, a question submitted for you, wondering how Common Good is working on driving income opportunities for growers to realize as a result of their water management practices. What can you tell us about Common Good's efforts on that front?
Well, there must be somebody in the audience that put that out there for me, because that's our whole business model, is that we are actually paying farmers for the water savings. So it's a different, all the incentives that have helped farmers make the business case to convert to subsurface drip irrigation, aside from the improved yields and the financial modeling that we go through with them about what it's going to look like for their crop, our model is to actually pay them based on the amount of water they save, so they are incentivized to save. And we monitor that through water meters every year. So when we enter an agreement with a farmer, they're agreeing to report that applied water to us, and we are basically sending in a third-party verification valuation party that comes in and looks at all of the benefits that go along with that water savings, and that's basically what they're rewarded for the life of that first alfalfa crop. And then again, it would be different rotations on different crops, so the term of the agreement might be shorter than 7 years if it was different crops.
Very good. Well, unfortunately, we are at time, and that's going to be all we're going to have the opportunity to discuss here today. Really appreciate all of you for the discussion. Folks, please join me in thanking Stephanie, Val, Daniel, and Jonathan.